Hello, everyone. Welcome to Or This. This is my Monday morning quarterbacking of the scriptures in the sermon for the previous Sunday. And this video is for March 8th. I can't believe we were in March already. And this is really Monday morning quarterbacking because I'm actually doing this video on Monday. Hopefully I get it posted today. But the scriptures assigned for the day are Exodus chapter 17, verses 1 through 7, Psalm 95. The second reading is Romans 5, verses 1 through 11, and the gospel was John 4, 5 through 42. Quite a long, lengthy gospel compared to what we are used to, but the gospel passages are going to get a couple verses longer next week and a couple verses longer the following week. But we have these stories from John's gospel that we get at this point in Lent of this year. And I preached about the Samaritan woman that Jesus meets when he goes to Samaria on purpose. And we talked about her situation and Jesus seeing her as somebody who he shouldn't really be talking to. Basically being a Jew and being a man, her being a Samaritan and being a woman. But Jesus is Jesus. And so he crosses that boundary and talks to her and draws her into relationship. He talks about the living water that comes from relationship with him. So, but woven into the story about the Samaritan woman's encounter with Jesus, there's a section where the conversation between Jesus and the woman stops, and the disciples who had gone into the city to get food came back, and they're trying to urge him to eat something. Now he gets a little cryptic with them and says, "I have food to eat that you do not know about." And the disciples are like, "Surely no one has brought him something to eat." Now, let me just tell you what I find interesting is in the conversation with the Samaritan woman, Jesus says, asks her to give him a drink to draw water from the well. And we don't know if she ever actually does that. It's not spelled out in the passage. But then all of a sudden, Jesus starts talking about having this living water that he could give to her. So obviously the living water is symbolic of what, how relationship with Jesus will impact the life of her and others like her who feel their spirit, their soul kind of parched and dried up. And I talked about being sucked dry by some of the the ways in which humanity likes to the hatred between the Samaritans and Jews. So the ways that we kind of pick on people, pick on each other, and deem some people to not have the same level of dignity or humanity than we do. Jesus comes, though, to refresh our souls when we have been sucked dry by other people. Jesus then talks, so he's talking about living water, even though he just asked her for a drink. And then the disciples are trying to urge Jesus to eat something, and he says, "I have food that you do not know about." So there's a lot of symbolic talk to notice in John's gospel. And to be honest, Jesus uses this as a springboard into a teaching moment, just as he did with asking the Samaritan woman for water, because how else would he have entered into a conversation with her? So the disciples are trying to figure out where Jesus found food. Jesus says, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and complete his work." So in a way, in a couple verses before Jesus enters this conversation with the disciples, they come back and see Jesus talking to the woman. And it says they were astonished that he was speaking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you want?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" So they already have in their minds, why is Jesus talking to this woman? Jesus knows that this is on their mind. And Jesus says, my food is to do the will of the one who sent me and complete his work. And I believe that through what Jesus is there, you get the disciples hopefully got the sense that Jesus' conversation with the Samaritan woman was doing the work, the will of him who sent Jesus, doing the work that God sent Jesus to do. And so in reaching out to her, and then she invites her town to come back and meet Jesus. In reaching out to her, and through her then reaching out to these Samaritans, who are generally viewed negatively and hated by Jesus' disciples, not just Jesus' disciples, but the Jewish people of the time. Jesus is doing God's work, and it is reframing the disciples' mind to see all of a sudden, to see God reaching out to these people that they had decided, that their culture had decided were enemies, but it turns out that God was reaching out to them. And what does that do then for their mindset? Jesus continues then by saying, do not say 4 months more than comes the harvest, but look around you and see how the fields are ripe for harvesting. Jesus says this in Samaria. Look around and see how the fields are ripe for harvesting. He talks then about, I sent you to reap for that which you did not labor. Others have labored and you have entered into their labor. So Jesus, I think, connects this with the work that he starts. And now they are going to be the ones to continue this work. And we know that the disciples continued Jesus' work after his ascension. But this moment is a reminder to them that reaching out to the Samaritans is part of God's will. And that these people that were othered by the Judeans of the time, the Judeans and Samaritans kind of did not cross over very much. Jesus is saying, nope, they are part of God's they are part of God's family too. And y'all who are going to be continuing my ministry need to remember that and know that my ministry is for them and anyone else who has been cut off and othered for various reasons. And in the sermon, I also did specifically talk about the woman herself. And I think part of this it goes beyond only Samaritans to say, this woman who had been married 5 times and is currently living with somebody who isn't her husband, it's not because she's jumping from man to man. That's not the way it worked in those days. It was because it was a patriarchal society, and a husband could dismiss his wife for whatever reason, or it could be that a husband died. It doesn't say clearly that she's been divorced 5 times. It says you have had 5 husbands. So it's really the husbands who have the power in this. And here this poor woman is being shunned and having to go to the well at noon because the other women would go early in the morning and they probably talk. So the harvest is not only Samaritans, but it is also people like this woman who are being treated, who basically being treated like they should be ashamed of themselves for something that really is out of their control, has nothing to do with her character at all. But she's being put in this position by others who have power in the society, and she's left to just be bounced around. And so I focused on her in the sermon, but this part also speaks to the witness. There's 2 pieces of this that speak to the witness of those of us who are Jesus followers in those who believe in Jesus. One is the Samaritan woman who goes back and invites her townspeople to come and see the man who could tell her everything, who knew everything about her. But then this Jesus reminding his disciples and saying, look around you and see that the fields are ripe for harvest. So anybody that you look around and you see, they are being othered, they are being mistreated, they are being shamed. There's your harvest. Those are the people who need the living water that Jesus provides, the connection, the belonging to Jesus, in relationship with Jesus, the belonging to God's family. And so that those are the two pieces that remind us of the harvest, of those, that there's plenty of people out there who need the living water of Jesus, who need to be connected with God's love, who need to be reminded that they belong. So those are my thoughts for this week, and I'd be glad to hear some of your thoughts. Please share them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. God bless.